Hello? Okay. I don't know why it takes my model so long to load in. I did a posture check, Moko. Hello, K-chan, Skarn, Moko, Pyro who can't hear me anymore. I know for sure if anyone else is even still here. I always want to forget the timer. And my book. There we go. Alright, we're on chapter 13, which is in Arlo's perspective. How long is the chapter? Oh, it's a split chapter. I don't know, we'll see. 14 is also kind of long. We might not read 2 chapters today, because these both look like really long chapters. This wasn't the fairy ring. The passage that Arlo climbed down was the stairway to hell, and nobody could ever convince her otherwise. She had no idea what she was going to do when she finally made her way out of her nightmares incarnate, but she was absolutely certain she was never setting foot in this darkness again. Because it wasn't mere darkness. The air here was impossibly dense and far too damp and cool for the shadows to be lack of light alone. The darkness didn't fill a space like liquid tar poured into a mold. It certainly didn't throb like a fizzling energy against Arlo's skin, static shocking shivers down her spine. Darkness wasn't a living thing that whispered in her ear, planning panicked thoughts not quite her own in Arlo's mind, hurrying her down slick steps with nothing but the vaguely slimy walls to guide her, because the darkness, she suspected, had also killed her phone and the flashlight it came equipped with. Every step was paired with an increasing urgency to turn back around, as though the passageway itself tried to dissuade her from her course of action. Why, she could only guess. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was magic meant to keep humans from following whatever lure fairies used to draw them into the spider's web. Maybe it was just a product of her damned imagination, but when the disembodied, not quite Arlo voice in her head started hinting that if she didn't leave at once, she would suffocate and die, forever entombed in this god's awful place, she didn't care. She desperately wanted to do what it said, turn right back around and leave. Are you confused, K-chan? Are you just spouting random quotes? Okay. Oh yeah, I guess I should have did the content warning. It'll come up on its own. I think. Did I turn it back on, actually? Now that I think about it? I don't know if I turned it back on. Why do I need to log in again? Yep, I had that off still. Okay. There we go. Now we have the content warning. Now to remember where I was at. I can't, she chanted under her breath. I can't. Turning around would be smart. It would be an excellent idea. Arlo suspected people braver than she wouldn't continue on at this point. The passageway was a level of horror she'd never before encountered, but if she turned back around, she'd have to face that troll again. She'd have to face their smug superiority and give them the satisfaction of confirming that she didn't have what it took to enter the fairy ring. She might as well be fully human, after all, if the presence of magic alone, however inordinately powerful, was enough to scare her off. Arlo pushed herself to continue on. She doubled her pace, flying as quickly as she could safely manage down the rest of the stairs, and the moment she cleared the bottom step, the entire world lurched around her. Only when color and sound burst to life in her senses did she realize the passage had stripped these away to begin with. Arlo was left feeling as though she'd just been strained through a particularly elaborative save? Oh! I forgot that does that when I do the exclamation point. I am angry. Okay, there we go. Hello, Kenyo. Thank you, K-chan. I totally didn't even notice. Yeah, angry baby. Yeah, I always forget that typing an exclamation point triggers the angry. I need to change it so it doesn't, because I have to type exclamation points. No, I'm not gonna remember where I was at again. Oh my goodness, where was I at? Hey, No Zone. How are you? And Kenyo and K-chan, how are you? Well, I try to remember where I was at. I think I stopped in the middle of a paragraph. That's the problem. Bagel pizza bites. Bring me some, K-chan. I found where I was. Okay, good luck on your practice race. I'm going to kill Celadon, she muttered shakily. Stupid magic passageway, piece of garbage. A little warning might have been nice. She hated her cousin with every fiber of her being at the moment. Maybe if he'd told her about this passageway of doom, he'd have convinced her to sit this plan out. But it was over. She was here. The fairy ring sprawled out before her. It was a club like any other in construction. Not that Arlo had been to any, considering she was underage by human standards, and didn't have friends apart from Celadon to go with, besides. There was a circular bar in the center of the room, and a dance floor off to her left, packed full of bodies, writhing and lurching around one another. To Arlo, they looked like a sea of worms, rising and falling on waves of beats that poured from the live band at the back of the room, just beyond a set of stairs that led to some private landing. Keanu Reeves has his own holiday in Canada? Why? I mean, yeah, Keanu Reeves is amazing, but why does he have his own holiday in Canada? And why Canada? Overhead lighting threw a rainbow of colors around the open space, glancing off the dancers and the mist that curled between them. When she tried to focus her senses, the jumble of auras was as impossible to untangle as the bodies to which they belonged. It was the cages overhead that set this particular club apart from others run by the folk. The cages, gleaming gold, suspended from the ceiling by thick chains. There was a human in each, blissed out on the food and drink they'd been tricked into consuming. Feathers had been stuck to them, a parody of birds as colorful as the flashing lights, and when one of them stopped singing, their throats either too dry or bodies too fatigued, some even beginning to surface from their stupor, the crowd below would hiss and boo, throw more bits of food or the contents of their drinks to prod them on. It was the platform backed by the band, where scantily clad humans danced like marionettes, wide-eyed and blank, splashed with glowing paint and grime, and undoubtedly worse. Arlo noticed they were bruised and scraped and worn for the carelessness they had no idea they suffered. It was the yet more humans trapped on the floor, so giddy on fairy food that they danced themselves to collapsing, if they were lucky. The wholly preserved heads mounted on the walls hung the way hunters collected trophies from their favorite kills, catches these vicious fairies liked too much to release back to their lives. Arlo tried to look away, but one terrible sight replaced another in every direction. Here in this gathering of the worst of their kind, where the courts held no rule, folk were allowed to vent their frustrations with the life they'd been forced to give up, all for a peace they didn't want. These humans were made to pay a terrible price for whatever pitiful thing they'd been promised. Money that would shrivel up into leaves, gems that would rot into mushroom caps, a beautiful face that wasn't so beautiful underneath its glamour, every promise disguising a sting, and many wouldn't survive the days they gave in trade to receive it. It's from a movie where he looks sad. Cheer Up Keanu Day. Okay, yeah, I know the meme you're talking about. I can't believe they made a holiday because of the meme, though. Just keep moving, she muttered, suppressing a shudder. Just don't think about it and keep moving. She knew what she was going to find here. Both Celadon and rumor warned her. The courts couldn't intervene in anything that happened here. This crack that fell outside their control, as technically it belonged to the wild. There was nothing she could do, and she would lose her nerve if she didn't keep moving. Head down. Don't attract too much attention. There was seating to her right. Dozens of tables stood littered about, all the way to the far wall and the row of booths that lined it. These were also packed with folk, and it was here that was probably the best place for Arlo to gather her information. But it occurred to her now she'd actually have to go up and talk to some of these fairies, and she had no idea how to start the conversation she needed to have. Have you seen a blonde young woman with gray eyes, wears a lot of black, and perchance do you know she's been going around killing people lately? Yeah, no, she'd sound too much like a member of the Faucian, the magical community's standard police force. In a place like this, that was only going to land her in the trouble she was trying to avoid. Gotta start small, she said to herself. The staff, at least the ones who weren't humans, made to shuffle around like animated dolls with trays, would probably be the best place to start. With a table, she could flag one down under the pretense of placing an order. But of course I picked the busiest night to do this, she sighed. The fairy ring was a popular place for the criminal lot, and it wasn't hard to understand why. As a fairy-exclusive club where glamours could be shed completely without risk of being caught, it was a place of respite. Here, no one had to exhaust themselves on the human standard of appearance. With strict, unforgiving court law dictated, they used their glamours to weave, and many struggled to maintain for lengthy periods of time. On her way through the tables in search of a vacancy to claim for her own, Arlo passed a group of gnomes, squat, knobbly men with great graying beards, orange peel, leathery skin, and stubby limbs. They were as rampant as rats in the cities these days. They were all nursing tankards bigger than they were, and none of them were tall enough to actually see over their table. Arlo's focus moved to the next table, occupied by something that looked a lot like a rose-pink elephant in a crisp white suit, and sporting so much gold they glinted blindingly every time the rainbow lights bounced their way. Their partner was a rather splendid-looking woman with 4 pairs of beetle-black eyes, long navy hair, and gem-blue skin that shimmered like the scales of a fish. Arlo had no idea what either of them was, but it was possible they'd followed the ring from one of its previous haunts, and therefore weren't something normally found in spring territory. Another table she passed hosted a giggling group of fairies. Arlo did recognize dryads. All of them were gorgeous, with teak and oak and willow brown bark for skin and petals sewn together for clothes. They were tall and supple, and attracting a great deal of attention from a group of citrine yellow, lavender, and pastel-toned pixies, seated a few tables off, whose iridescent wings were perked to full mast in the attempt to track some of that attention back. At last, after a few more minutes of winding through the crowd, she spotted a vacancy in a far row of booths. It was a little out of the way, but that might actually be a blessing, as it would be much harder for anyone she didn't want the attention of to notice she was there. She pushed ahead and would have made it without trouble had a hand not darted out to catch her wrist and halt her in her tracks. "Hey," Arlo whipped around. Her indignation wilted the moment her gaze met cold black. Weren't you just..." The troll from outside the club was now seated at a table, watching Arlo carefully. Gone was their glamour, at least the one that made them human, and their bulk was revealed to be distinctly rocky under olive skin that was tinged pine green. The rune-like tattoos etched across their head were still visible, running down their neck and under the collar of their shirt. But now 2 blunt horns, no more than 5 inches tall, protruded from their temples. These horns were the same volcanic glass black as their eyes and nails, which one free hand drummed on the table. Reading while Overwatch 2 gaming? Okay, Minna. Have fun in Overwatch. It was clear they intended Arlo to take the chair opposite them, the only other one at their table. She hesitated. They'd gotten here too quickly, without Arlo even noticing. Fairies were pretty good at moving unseen, but trolls, especially the size of the one before her, shouldn't be capable of practically popping up wherever they pleased. She wasn't sure what to make of this abnormal behavior. "Sit," said the troll. "I'd really rather not." The troll dropped Arlo's hand and jerked her chin at the vacant chair. "Sit," they repeated, and Arlo found herself complying despite her reservations. Appeased, the troll relaxed. "I like you." Arlo wrinkled her nose. "You have a funny way of showing that. What do you want with me?" "What I want is irrelevant right now," Arlo Jarsdale. "The real question is, what do you want?" What did she want? Well, an answer to the things she asked would be a wonderful place to start. "How do you know my name?" The troll lifted their shoulders in a casual shrug. "I know much more than that, but that's irrelevant at the moment too, if you haven't already figured that out." Looking off over Arlo's shoulder, they jerked their chin again at something behind her. "There's an exit at the back of the club. Do you see it?" Arlo turned in her chair. Between flashing lights and countless other heads and limbs and antlers and horns, she could just make out a door concealed in the shadowy distance, marked by a glowing red sign. "Yeah, I see it." The troll grunted again. When Arlo turned back around, they jerked their chin at something else, this time off to her right and close to the bar. "That dryad there, do you see her?" She scanned the crowd. 3-4 tables away sat a dryad all on her own. She was hunched over her drink, slim, rosewood shoulders pinched up at her ears, pansy black hair hanging around her like a morning veil. Her tension seemed to coil tighter with every venomous glare she shot off across the room. She was beautiful, just like the other dryads Arlo had passed on the way here, but something about the way she held herself made her look tired and brittle. "Yeah, I see her too. What?" "If you go through the door behind you, you'll find yourself on a path that may very well unravel the mystery behind what claimed that ironborn child's life back at the cafe." Arlo sat a little straighter at attention. "Choose instead to speak with that dryad, and you'll find yourself on the path of justice. The dryad knows the answers to the questions that brought you here tonight. How fortunate you are that you chose the same night she did for your visit. What she can tell you will undoubtedly lead to the capture of your quarry. What she can tell you will right a wrong that's been left to fester for just over a century and put to rest an ancient grudge that even gods cannot appease." Cocking her head, Arlo considered the troll in a new light. Their behavior was growing odder and odder. In addition to their unusually strong, strange glamours and lack of detectable aura, they were quite a bit more eloquent than she'd ever imagined a troll to be. According to pretty much everyone, they weren't the most verbose of creatures. Why are you telling me any of this? What's in it for you to help me out? The door or the dryad. These are the options fate has allowed you in coming here, they went on to explain. But they aren't the only paths available to take. They leaned forward. At some point in this conversation, their fingers had ceased drumming. They seemed at last to be arriving at their point, and despite the insistence in the back of her mind that this fairy was the sort of danger she'd been warned to avoid, Arlo was eager to find out what that was. In the simplest of terms, you are at a crossroads, Arlo. Fate has already decided on your future, but there are certain moments in your life, such as now, where she gives you the chance to choose the path you'd like to take to get there. Lucky you, this moment is occurring in a fairy ring. The fairy ring. I am certain you weren't aware that fairy rings are one of the few spaces deities can visit in the mortal realm these days without invitation. It's lucky that you came, because these moments of choice are something else as well. These moments are the only time one's destiny can be exchanged for something made by someone other than my Titan sister, and it's been some time since I've had a proper player on this board, not to mention one that fate would have otherwise made into a hero. Arlo stared. You're not a troll. The troll grinned, revealing more of the blunt boulders that served as their teeth. As it drew across their face, their image flickered, just as their human mask had done before. There was Arlo's answer. I'm good, Minna. How are you? That flicker didn't last nearly enough time to make sense of what she saw, but the impression of a much sharper face, green fire hair, and tiny twin galaxies petrified in obsidian stuck in Arlo's mind long after the image had gone. It was all she needed to know that she wasn't speaking to your average everyday fairy, and certainly not something as simple as a troll. But what did that make them, she wondered, their Titan sister? Was this troll some sort of god? So, let me get this straight. She shoved aside the millions of other questions clamoring in her brain and focused on her companion. Fate has decided I'm going to be some sort of hero, and right now I'm at a special moment in my life that's going to determine how heroic a hero I'm going to be, depending on what I choose to do. And one of those things I can choose is going to tell me what caused Cassandra's blood to glow. The what-if feeling of hope, both back at the hearing and before her arrival in the club, had it been leading her to this moment? Had everything that had happened recently been nudging her in this direction, not to a life of fae, but to the life of a hero? The not troll nodded. Yes, fate is rather determined you play a bigger part in the story unfolding around you. Choose the door or choose the dryad. Both are her will, both are meant to shape you into the grandest role your future holds, in different ways of course. It all depends on the work you put in to become what fate intended. Arlo could almost feel the blood drain out of her face. You mentioned something about exchanging fates, though. What if I don't want to be a hero? She cared about what happened to the courts. She cared about what had happened to Cassandra. She wanted to help, wanted to bring this terrible chapter in the lives of the Ironborn community to a close. She loved reading stories about people taking off on adventures, discovering they were natural leaders born to make a difference in the world. But a hero? Heroes went through so much hardship. Heroes were the stuff of tragedies. They took charge of situations and challenged authority and made decisions not only for themselves, but on behalf of other people too. Arlo. Arlo could barely make up her mind about going to school. She was a disappointment in pretty much every area of her life, and she'd only disappointed this too. Because this was more than poking around for clues to pass off to each other, more competent people. This was choosing to be responsible for other people's lives, to keep them safe, to be their hope. Arlo was firmly an extra, a background character, the healer of an adventuring party if anything at all. She simply didn't have what it took to be anything else, no matter what fate seemed to think. But given the way the troll across from her smirked, she'd apparently said the right thing. Two black eyes flickered even darker, revealing another glimpse of fathomless infinity. Their grin curled a little sharper. Well then, what would bring us to your other options? Which are, you could leave, you could choose not to be a hero of any kind and simply force fate to reset her plan, Force her to find you a new role. Arlo's gaze darted over the troll's shoulder to the fairy ring's entrance and the darkness waiting to receive her exit. Fate has already given you her warning for this, her temple, as she warns all. Once is all you get. You won't have the same experience should you choose to leave the way you came, they explained, picking up on her hesitation. And that's it? I can just get up and walk away and I don't have to be anyone's anything? Was it really that simple? Could she leave through the front door and in so doing leave the heavy burden of her supposed destiny behind? Would she do it was the real question. Was she really selfish enough to walk away from something she'd not only been so determined to help, resolve in coming here, but that also needed her so badly it was willing to make her into a hero for her help? Did it actually matter what she chose, or would the situation find someone else to play the role instead? Just because Arlo apparently fit the requirements for this part didn't mean she was the only one who did, and surely there was someone out there better suited for playing Savior than she was. It's as simple as that, the Not Troll confirmed. However, in the spirit of fairness, I'd like to draw your attention to something else. They lifted a black-nailed hand. This time they physically pointed, across the sea of faces and tables, to the booth Arlo had been previously heading toward. The one she wanted was still unoccupied, but from this angle, the one in front of it was no longer obscured. Her mouth parted in a silent gasp when she recognized one of its two occupants, the girl in black, Nausicaa Kraken. That's good, Minna. Are you winning in Overwatch? I know nothing about Overwatch. Her aura was once again wholly undetectable. Like everyone else, she looked different in the fairy ring. She was a little too far off for Arlo to make out anything definite about her face, but she still wore that air of nonchalance, like a cloak around her, and sprawled as though that booth of hers was her throne. She was still clad entirely in black. Her legs were stretched out under the table, and seemed even longer, thanks to the tight bind of her leather pants, and the lethal points of her red-soled stilettos. Much more of her was on display than when she'd been in the cafe, her leather jacket traded for a scanty top of lace and mesh, baring her strong shoulders. In this lighting, her unbound, sand-blonde hair was an ever-changing rainbow of colors. On anyone else, this might have been a whimsical effect, but on this girl, on Nausicaa, it did nothing to mute the serpentine deadliness at rest beneath her casual facade. In fact, it made her appear even more wraith-like than before. I just lost my spot. Oh, there I am. She was playing cards and looked to be far too comfortable both with the things that should be weighing on her conscience, like Cassandra's murder, and her partner. This said loads about her character, in Arlo's opinion. If it had been her seated across from that globule, gargantuan mass of blood-crusted skin and broken teeth, she wouldn't be half as calm as Nausicaa, who just now pitched back her head to bark out laughter in response to something that creature had just said. Arlo turned back to the not troll with a familiar, anxious nausea churning in her gut. She was kind of the someone I was hoping to avoid tonight, you know. The Dark Star, yes, I do know. But you want me to go talk to her, she concluded. Yes, replied the not troll. I do. What Nausicaa is, what she's capable of. I would very much like to collect for what's coming, and before the others realize they ought to try to do the same. She is the future I'm willing to offer in exchange for the one you currently shoulder. This is the option I would like you to take. Ah, so it wasn't Arlo, whoever this was actually after. Once again, she was only the means to get to someone else. You know she's probably a murderer, don't you? Oh yes, she is that, and her darkness has made her legend in certain circles. But she's not the one behind the crimes you wish to lay at her feet. Oh? That wasn't exactly comforting, however otherwise informative. So Nausicaa hadn't been the one behind Cassandra's death. Wonderful. She was still a murderer by this mysterious fairy's own confession. Arlo was no hero, but she was no villain either. She didn't want to keep that sort of company. Well, she announced, while she still had the confidence to walk away from this. She pushed back in her chair and rose from her seat. Maybe you should talk to her then. I don't want anything to do with Nausicaa Kraken, or really anything to do with whatever you're working up to ask me. I've learned what I came here to learn, that the Dark Star isn't behind the Ironborn deaths. It would have to do. She wouldn't abandon this cause completely. She'd still help any way she could, but she couldn't go through that door in the back of the club, or talk to that distressed dryad. She couldn't condemn the folk to her as their savior. It would have to be someone else, someone like the High King, born to wear the mantle of the hero. Someone who wasn't a teenage girl. You're leaving then? Arlo nodded. She slid out of her seat. I'm leaving. Thank you for making me aware of my options. I realize you didn't have to do that, and I'm grateful. I just don't want to be anyone's hero, not even yours. I don't want to be a pawn in some game, or one of your adventures, or whatever you're trying to do here. I'm not cut out to be the person someone needs. Fate had made a mistake. There was no other explanation. She wasn't special. She was Arlo, just Arlo, and the life she had was pretty good. Why would she want to shake that up for all the stress that came with getting involved in life or death matters? You misunderstand who I am. That's probably because you never told me. The mysterious troll god shook their head. I don't want you to be a hero, Arlo Jarsdell. What I want you to be is something a bit less tangled up in rules. What I want you to be is my hollow star, as my husband has taken to calling the children I adopt. Someone whose future is severed from fate and tied to luck instead. Someone who can alter the outcome of any decision to form as many destinies for themselves as they can dream. That sounds like it's actually harder than being a hero. She pulled a face. Endless possibilities? Luck? Yeah, I'm not so sure I have much of that. So, thanks but no thanks. Nodding farewell, Arlo stepped around the table. Once again, her wrist was caught in the Knot Troll's lightning-quick grip. Take this, they said, gentler than they'd spoken all evening. There was a sudden weight in the fold of her fist, and when the Knot Troll released her, Arlo lifted her hand to unfurl her fingers and examine what they'd magicked into her hold. A die? She looked back at the Knot Troll, raising a brow. Was this some sort of joke? The die was beautiful, carved from jade the exact same color as Arlo's eyes, and each of its 20 sides was marked by pure gold numbers, but it was still just a die, wasn't it? A die, the Knot Troll confirmed, and it's all yours. I made it specially for you. Okay. Well, thanks, but I already told you I wasn't going to help you. And if you never use it, that's entirely up to you, but it's yours, and it will work for no other. If you ever decide you'd like to take me up on my offer, all you have to do is say so and give it a roll. Is this D&D now? Maybe. That's how you have to be a hero. You have to get a dice so you can make rolls. Even heroes have to make saving throws. Arlo nodded. She pocketed her gift, had a feeling that insisting they take it back would only end in a headache, and she could always pitch it later when they weren't around to catch her. Alright, well noted. Don't hold your breath or anything, though. The Knot Troll merely shrugged in response. Arlo decided to take this as permission to leave. She spun back around, ignoring the urge inside her to glance back at that door, to wonder a little more after that dryad and what she had to say, because no, she couldn't. She couldn't let herself get pulled in by curiosity. In her haste to escape before the Knot Troll came up with another way to detain her, it was only in her periphery, a glimpse too quick to process, that she noticed the way the Knot Troll's black eyes flashed. The pulse that rippled through the air and tugged over ever so slightly at proceedings. A fairy leaving their table in a huff the exact moment Arlo happened to step forward. With no more warning than this, the two of them collided, and the remainder of the fairy's drink sloshed over the rim of his cup, soaking the front of his shirt. Watch it, he snapped. Arlo, who'd very nearly toppled over, could only stare. She'd never met a Licid Fae before this moment, at least not to her knowledge. They didn't tend to like the courts and crowded city spaces, and had little desire to play at politics and mingle with society outside their own. Just about the only reason it wasn't the Licid sitting in control of things instead of the Cid, as was the general consensus, as their magic was considerably more powerful. The surprise of their collision knocked his human glamour of a middle-aged man away to reveal his blazing amber eyes and frost-blue skin. His aura, discernible from the too many others only because of their close proximity, sat like a barely there wintry pine in her nose and practically shimmered in the fringe of her sight, with which a Cid phase had never done. "I'm sorry," Arlo stammered. The Licid and the Cid. They didn't get along all that well. So little, in fact, that the Licid almost preferred to go by the distinction of fairy, and were generally welcomed as such in rings and other like spaces. The Licid thought the Cid every bit as arrogant and cruel as the gods had been, and hated being forced into strict regulation just to be able to live in the courts. Conversely, the Cid couldn't stand knowing that the hierarchy they enjoyed could be easily toppled if the Licid decided they were tired of their forests and the rules that bound their strength. Arlo could see by the way this one narrowed his eyes that he'd finally realized what Arlo was. "Piss off," he grunted, his mood curdling further. He shoved her further away from him. Arlo stumbled again. The Licid's actions had been too quick for her to defend against. The force of his push sent her into the table where she and her mysterious companion had just been sitting. The knot troll was gone now, but the hard wood was still present, and it hurt like hell to hit so harshly against it. The screech of scattering chairs scraping the floor was enough to draw the attention of several others around them, but no one moved to help. The only reaction was a few cheers and whoops of laughter as spectators toasted the altercation. Groaning, Arlo gingerly pried herself off the wooden surface, her palms smarting. She was a little more durable than an ordinary human, but that didn't stop anger from sparking through her enough that heat crept up her neck and bled into her cheeks. "That wasn't very nice," drawled a throaty voice. Arlo recognized it instantly. "Oh no, Minna! Why'd you make Twitch crash?" It was probably Twitch's fault. "Your whole PC crashed." Oh, fuck. I just hit my knee on the table. Did Twitch make your PC crash? You looked up too much porn? "Yeah, maybe next time she'll watch where she's going," the Licid growled out. It was a little difficult to be offended when Arlo's brain was busy trying to work out how her murderer-turned-savior had gotten to her so quickly. But it was Nausicaa who'd come to her aid, and with her standing as close as she currently was, Arlo could see that her face was still the deadly weapon of sharp angles and proud features it had been in the cafe. The steel eyes, considering the Licid before them, were still dagger lethal. Too much porn? Well, don't break your new computer with all the porn. You don't want the same thing to happen again. Her aura was still noticeably absent. Something had changed, though. She'd definitely been wearing a glamour back in the cafe, because here now, in one of the only places that discouraged doing so, the dark and skeletal horror Arlo had only glimpsed before was far more pronounced. Clearer. Like a high-definition image set beside standard resolution. Nausicaa was still gorgeous without her glamour, but the 9 rings of hell couldn't come up with anything more terrible than the way her grin split across her face, like razor wire catching skin and tearing it apart. The transformation was oddly arresting. Nausicaa was oddly arresting, though why noticing this should make Arlo's breath catch in her chest, when heavens knew there were many people in her life outright stunning, and their unglamoured glory eluded her completely. Yo, did she just, like, fall for Nausicaa? She got a crush on her now? Okay, Minna, have a good night. Go eat. Where was I? Maybe, Nausicaa replied, the steel in her eyes glinting. I don't know if you'll be able to say the same. The Fae cocked his head. He was clearly trying to work out how much of a threat Nausicaa could really be to him. When he squared his jaw and opened his mouth to growl at a retort, he'd clearly come to a conclusion, but the flare of his temper died on his lips. Finally surfacing from her momentary stupor, Arlo leaped back in alarm. The Fae stiffened. The several who'd been following this exchange from their tables started in their seats, upsetting their drinks and knocking their limbs painfully against the furniture. Others took much keener interest in what was now the good possibility of a fight. Nausicaa had drawn a weapon she hadn't been holding a second ago, with such speed that Arlo could swear she pulled it straight from the air itself. Unsheathed, the point of her katana's long black blade hovered perilously close to the Lycid's left eye. If she so much as flicked her wrist, he'd be instantly blinded. Her darkness has made her legend in certain circles. The mysterious troll's words surged to the fore of Arlo's mind. She swallowed against the swell of her fear. Nausicaa might not be the one behind the death at the cafe, but she wasn't innocent. No one who stood with such presence behind an actual God's damned sword could be innocent, and Nausicaa looked happier now than she had all evening. Hey, Arlo heard herself say. Quite without permission, she lifted a slightly trembling hand to the arm that held Nausicaa's blade. Stop it, don't hurt him. I really wasn't watching where I was going, and I think he's just drunk. There was the barest spark in their initial contact, but more alarming was when Nausicaa's gaze shifted to lock with hers. Arlo's stomach clenched against the painfully uncomfortable sensation of stabbing magic. Why does it do that? Arlo wondered aloud, more to herself than Nausicaa, whose dark blonde brows furrowed over the question. If she had a reply, it was cut off by the resurgence of the Lycid's mood. I don't need your help, Sid bitch, he snapped. Nausicaa flicked her wrist. Fortunately for the Fae, she'd altered her target from his eye to his mouth, and the resulting damage was nothing more sinister than a nick to his lower lip, though the wound was deep enough to draw a hiss of pain along with a trickle of sapphire blood. FYI, you really did, Nausicaa scathed. This ring, it doesn't bind my violence, the same way it does yours, and I don't unsheathe Kate without intent on taking a life. Whistling precision brought the point of her katana to the stone floor. In the next moment, everything from blade to hilt burst apart into ink-black smoke, and Kate dissolved into the air. Piss off, she added in a sneer, hurling the Fae's earlier words back at him. With a hand pressed to his lower lip, the Lycid glared over blue-stained fingers, first at Nausicaa, then at Arlo. If you think you can attack and threaten me without consequence— Attack you? I didn't attack you, Arlo spluttered. Oh, for fuck's sake. Nausicaa took a hold of Arlo's shoulder and spun her around as easily as though she were a rag doll. Go find someone else to throw your tantrum, asshole, and get your lip looked at, she added over her shoulder, already leading Arlo away. I can't remember which one of my weapons I edged with poison. Barking out more laughter at the look on the Lycid man's face, she committed herself fully now to directing Arlo back to the booth she'd come from. The grotesque creature Nausicaa had been sitting with tracked their return with a curious gaze. Geez, Red, Nausicaa said, back to her throaty drawling. Granted, the Lycid aren't the cuddliest of woodland creatures, but most are pretty chill. How do you even get one to go all rage monster on you? You must be next level irritating. I'm impressed. Where are we going? Back to the card game you so rudely interrupted. Cyberniscos was trying very hard to win his dinner. Kyber what? That thing at her table had a name? Cyberniscos. Interesting fellow, really. Once you get past the smell. Between him and you, tonight's been full of fun little surprises. And suddenly Arlo was at her limit with blithe behavior and not quite answers. She was tired of being pushed around like a pinball in a machine, bouncing off one interaction after another, and furthermore, her position hadn't changed. She wanted nothing to do with whatever Nausicaa was involved in, with what Arlo suspected was that not troll's attempt to get her to do what they wanted by sending Nausicaa to her rescue. She wasn't about to let this whirlwind of a girl sweep her up into this mess. Stop, Arlo ordered. Nausicaa stopped. At the very same moment, the door at the back of the club flew open. the very same one that mysterious knot troll had pointed out just minutes ago. It struck so loudly against the wall that the crack of wood meeting stone echoed across the tables. Everyone within earshot winced. The band at the opposite end of the room killed their music. It was only the entranced humans who continued on, as if nothing had happened, though with the wave of someone's hand, the ones in the cages fell silent. In moments, the steady hum of conversation was silenced as well, and everyone slowed to a standstill, gaping at the stringy-haired and lumpy mauve goblin standing in the rear exit's threshold. "An Ironborn has just been murdered," the creature cried, his shrill voice magically amplified to fill the room. Down stalked the walls with the ever-roaming rainbow of lights. "Go now if you don't want to be caught. The wild hunt is on its way." Tension rang in the punctuating silence. A glass, too absently set on some distant ledge, wobbled to the floor and shattered. With it, the spell over the club had broken. Chaos took its place. Was the Ironborn, murdered, close to the club? Or did they just hear the news that quickly? Does it ever bother you that the people you've been using for your experiments are exactly what you used to be? Hero looked up from the body laid out on his operating table. He didn't need to look. He knew the voice that had spoken almost as well as his own now, and no other made his pulse flutter in such a way. But look he did, and was unsurprised to find his hunter standing opposite him, grinning as though he'd been there all along and hadn't just materialized out of nowhere after weeks of absence and no word on where he'd gone or what it was he'd been doing. "People just like you," the hunter continued to muse. "Once upon a time. The lonely, the forgotten, the pitiful." "They're human," Hero interrupted bluntly. He had to clamp down on the rush of elation he felt at seeing the hunter, to hold on to his irritation with him. "We aren't the same at all, and never were." Which was true in a way, but also a lie. True because Hero had never been solely human. He was Ironborn, an alchemist, human and magic both. A lie because, while the fodder his employees collected for his use were exactly that to him, fodder, they were also more. They were him. They were the helplessness and hopelessness and pointlessness he'd felt back in a life he'd lacked, the power and means to escape on his own. They were control. It didn't bother Hero to take these people apart and fit them back together as something better, to play their savior the way his hunter had done for him. It relieved him. It quieted an anger nothing else had been able to purge, a grief he tried to ignore, a hunger that had grown insatiable of late. But such was the price of grandeur. True, the hunter flicked the body between them. The minute action still enough to slice through skin and bone, with the claw on the tip of his finger. Hero sighed. He'd have to get one of his employees to patch that up. "What does this matter? You certainly didn't seem to care when it was a little Ironborn girl you were carving into." "Where were you?" Hero blurted. His face had grown warm. His hands itched under their gloves. "Yo, is Hero the one killing Ironborn? And is the hunter the Reaper? Or is the hunter controlling the Reaper, maybe?" Things are getting interesting. What? I don't know what's happening with my model right now. Because I'm not even moving. The fuck? Okay. My model stopped freaking out for whatever reason that was. Or not? What is happening? Hello? Why are you doing weird things? Oh my lord. I don't know what's going on with the face tracking right now in VTube Studio. Yeah, there it goes again. Oh my goodness. What the hell is happening? Okay, Kate Sean, have good lurk. Did I leave that in the title? I forgot, we're not playing Faz after reading today. Yeah, I didn't realize I didn't change the title. There's gonna be ad in like 30 seconds. What the fuck, Pyro? Why are you saying what the fuck? Is it because the creepy face on the screen? My face tracking is going crazy for some reason. Are you good now? Are you gonna stop doing weird shit? Okay, there's an ad like gonna play now. Okay. I don't know what was going on with VTube Studio. Hopefully it's done doing whatever it was. Now I gotta find where I was at. Okay, I see where I'm at now. Where were you? Hero blurted. His face had grown warm, his hands hitched under their gloves. His hunter had followed through on every promise he'd made him, had given Hero the means to become greater than he'd ever dreamed possible. Creating a philosopher's stone had been no easy task. The process had already been started by someone else, and it needled at Hero more than he cared to admit that the hunter wouldn't tell him who. His lamb had already been primed for slaughter, branded by an array. Hero had spent the better part of 16 years waiting for it to mature and learning how to activate it when the time to do so finally came. So intricate was the formula that shaped it, so powerful were the symbols that gave it fuel. Each of those symbols had needed taming like a living wild creature before he could even begin the grueling process of mastering them. And then his hunter had brought him an ironborn girl. The array carved into her chest, directly over her heart, had been put there at birth by someone else's experimentation. The reason it had been explained being that the heart required time to adjust to its magic and accept what it would become. An adult's heart was already too hardened and rejected this particular magic outright, but children, they were wondrous, impressionable, full of belief and acceptance and trust. They had to be ironborn, of course, because this magic relied on the host to sustain it, on alchemy to help it grow, and yes, it had been a difficult hurdle for Hero to overcome, sacrificing someone so young, so very much like him, to his own personal gain, but Hero had been so eager to please. She'd been the first life he'd ever taken. The dead had grown considerably easier after that, but he didn't like talking about her, didn't like remembering what he'd lost to get this far, no matter the payoff, no matter the reward his ambitions had earned him, and the way his hunter looked at him now whenever he remembered to visit. No, it's totally Hero and the hunter, like, doing the shit. Working with the Reaper and killing the Ironborn. Where were you? He repeated. You've been gone for nearly a month, and I thought you were going to help me improve my Kava's plating? Oh, I've been here and there, the hunter replied, peeling away from the table to poke around at the various other instruments in Hero's workshop. You've been disappearing more and more, longer and longer. Have I done something? This very idea made his heart constrict and flooded him with anxiety that left him slightly breathless. Are you unsatisfied with me? The hunter laughed. Unsatisfied? He picked up a flask, filled with an acidic solution Hiro had been toying with in his spare time, for closer examination. No, you're doing just fine. You're everything I hoped you would be, my hero. He set down the flask and returned his attention back on Hiro, where it belonged. But I have other projects on the go, other people that need me. I need you. He sounded every bit as possessive as he felt, but for all he winced to hear that so bold in his voice, he couldn't bring himself to regret his comment. He didn't like sharing. He didn't like being compared to a project. He didn't like that the hunter's interest in him was clearly waning, regardless of what he said. We're supposed to be a team. You're supposed to be here. Let me guess. It's Arlo again, isn't it? Oh. The hunter never lost his amusement, even if it did frost over. Be careful how you speak to me. Hieronymus? I would hate to think you ungrateful for all I've done for you. I guess that's his full name. He goes by Hiro. I'm not, Hiro hurried to console. I'm not ungrateful, I'm just confused. You've been obsessed with this girl for as long as I've known you. I just want to know why. Why are you giving her so much of your time? She's barely 15, hasn't even been weighed yet, and people gossip. I know she isn't worth the interest. She's nothing, no one, an embarrassment, and it's not like you've ever talked to her, have you? All you do is watch, so what are you looking for? Looking for? The hunter scoffed. Nothing. Waiting for, on the other hand. He crossed the lab and placed his claw-free hand on Hiro's face. It was cool as always, in the rare instances the hunter touched him. Yet despite this, the contact heated Hiro's skin like fire, and Hiro never noticed until these fleeting moments how starved for warmth he was. Instinct nearly made him forget himself. He almost leaned in, but caught himself just in time. I've told you before, there's great potential in Arlo Jarsdale, something impressive that might become quite useful to me later on. I can be useful to you, Hiro breathed, words trembling. You don't need her. Hiro raised a hand. The hunter never let Hiro touch him in return, but perhaps this time. The hunter stepped back. Strung by his rejection, Hiro let his hand fall back to his side. Jealousy bores me. He started off toward the door. Let me know when you're ready to prove that usefulness. Wait, Hiro cried, then bit his lip to clamp down on what else he wanted to add. He'd made the hunter angry. That wouldn't do. He had to fix things and put himself back in the hunter's good graces. Maybe if Hiro did exactly that. Maybe if he proved just how much the hunter needed him, how useful Hiro really was, the hunter would stop looking elsewhere for the things he could find right here. Wait, I want to show you something. The hunter paused, then turned around and raised a brow in silent inquiry. A gift, Hiro added, for you, to help you with your other projects. I'm listening, the hunter purred. And Hiro showed him. He led him out of the workshop and down the hall, down to another floor where he kept his more sensitive endeavors, to the room where he kept his Reaper. Oh, Hiro's got the Reaper, not the hunter. A creature that hadn't been easy to come by, harder to capture, and even more difficult to break to his complete control. The children, those others you've branded for your experiment, many of their arrays have started to mature. The ones who wouldn't survive the strain of this transformation. They're going to draw an awful lot of attention. I think, in fact. Whispers have it the Seelie Summer Prince and his young retainer have recently found one such Ironborn, boy dead in the park. By their recount of the incident, he'd been glowing quite the unusual color. Hiro placed his gloved hands on the bars of the Reaper's alchemically reinforced cage. It rumbled at him, stirred, but made no move to attack him. An impressive show in itself, as Hiro kept him starved for better meanness. You're going to need help if you don't want anyone finding out what's really going on. He snapped his fingers. A pair of goblins entered, dragging between them a teenage Ironborn boy whose parents were still tearfully begging for his return on the human news. Wherever he is, whoever has him, please, give us our son back. His pale face was streaked with tears, his body bruised and right arm broken. He cried out for help, cursed and spat, and struggled against the hands keeping him captive. A missing child, the callous, fickle world would soon forget the moment something else came along to seize their attention. Hero stepped aside, dissolving along the way the array that kept the cage secure. Its door swung open. The Reaper tore out at a lunge. The room filled with screaming, but only the boys. Hero had conditioned his monster to touch no one other than Ironborn prey. You're going to want to teach it to only go after the Ironborn we've marked with the rays, of course, was all the hunter said. Watching the gruesome scene before him was something that looked a bit to Hero like longing. But then he lifted his gaze. It can only go after the failed stones. It needs more training. Of course, Master Hunter, Hero smiled. Whatever you require. The screaming stopped. The Reaper crowed. With a sickening crack of bone, it broke through the boy's chest and began to devour his innards, heart and all. A moment passed, and then finally the hunter smiled back, full and wide and glinting. It was a terrible thing, an arresting thing, a thing Hero craved, both poison and elixir. There was often no telling which, but he drank in the attention all the same. I think it's time you call me Leth, don't you? Hero smiled, and he didn't stop smiling until long after Leth left. Leth left. Okay, yeah, that was a really long chapter. We're not gonna read the next chapter because it's really long as well. And there goes VTube Studio again, doing something weird. Yeah, I completely didn't notice that I forgot to change the title after we figured out we weren't going to be playing Phaz afterwards. That's my bad. Oops. Kind of tight. There we go. There's the raid message. Maybe I'll actually copy it this time. What did I just do? Alright, I work the next 4 days as usual, so hopefully I'll still be reading every day as long as work doesn't suck too bad. But it'll just be short streams of just reading. Okay, well we're gonna go ahead and... Link! You came in, like, right at the end. You're late. We're about to raid Pyro. Yeah, you came in at the very end. Yeah, we're raiding in like 3 seconds. Bye.